So hello everybody, welcome to this expert session on investing in nature-based solutions. So first we will very briefly introduce ourselves. So my name is Wouter Botse. I'm a professor in environmental economics at the Utrecht University School of Economics. I also have here Friedeman Polzin. Friedeman, can you briefly introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Wouter. My name is Friedeman Polzin. I am also part of the Utrecht School of Economics. I'm an assistant professor there, and I'm also part of the Sustainable Finance Lab, one of the leading think tanks in the Netherlands when it comes to thinking about the role of the financial sector in the transition to a sustainable economy.
Thank you, Friedeman. And also Maria Bokajova is present.
Hi, hello everybody. I'm Maria, and I'm an assistant professor in environmental economics, also at Utrecht University School of Economics, doing broad research in environmental issues and doing the work on economic valuation of urban nature within the Naturvation project.
Thank you, Maria. So to kick off this discussion that we'll have, and also to answer your questions, you can use the chat function to answer or indicate any questions you may have. And I will start with a short presentation of some key research results we have around economic valuation of nature-based solutions and investing in them. So a starting point for this research is actually that nature-based solutions provides various multiple benefits to different groups of people. So for example, more green in cities helps cooling the city. It reduces air pollution and it gives benefits to people in terms of better health. So these type of benefits can also be put in economic values, which is useful because often the costs of nature-based solutions are very well known, but these economic values are immaterial and not directly known to people and policymakers. So that's why as researchers we put effort into valuing them so they can also be used for financing options. So one way we did this is through a meta-analysis, where, for example, we studied what are the economic values of different types of nature in cities and on what factors do these depend. And some key results of this are actually shown on this slide, on which, for example, you can see how a urban park is valued by about $12,000 per hectare per year by people. So, of course, these values, they're context dependent. So, for example, we find that they're higher for a higher income and population density because then more people can use them. But if there's already a lot of nature out there in a city, then building more nature has a slightly less per unit value. Now, based on these type of studies, we also examined what is the economic value of nature-based solutions that have been implemented already around Europe. And we did this by economically valuing 169 nature-based solutions in European cities. And there we found that the economic value of these interventions is very high. So for example, we estimated it's around $1.6 billion per year to urban residents of value that's being delivered. Moreover, we found that about 42% of these projects actually deliver a social return on investment, meaning that their annual benefits exceed investment costs, so that this every dollar you invest in these measures is actually larger than one. So this highlights that there's a big economic potential out there for creating more nature-based solutions in cities. We also looked in more detail, so how are these nature-based solutions financed? We actually found that there's a wide diversity of financing sources being used. So at 85% of the interventions were financed through public sources, 29% were co-financed by the EU, and 39% by non-public sources. So this highlights there's a diversity of financial arrangements out there that is relevant to examine in more detail. And that's actually what Friedeman Polzin and his colleagues did, and he will explain you more about this.
Yes, thank you very much, Wouter. So you already alluded to the fact that we have to make the costs and the benefits of these nature-based solutions more transparent. And one way of doing so is using the business model framework. to also systematically develop or engage private sector actors in commercializing, but also scaling up nature-based solutions. And here you see like a scheme of how we can look at this and how to develop valuable business models. It consists of three components that we derive from the literature. So it's the value proposition, so who's actually the customers, and that is for nature-based solution poses a challenge in some ways to define that. Then the value delivery, so who is actually involved in making sure that that the potential customer gets the value that you want to achieve. And then that relates mostly to finances, the value capture. So who is actually reaping the benefits from this investment. So these questions you have to systematically consider in order to develop viable business models, because after all, a business model needs to be economically sound and sustainable in order to survive. We also then looked at enabling conditions and risks. So what kind of conditions need to be present, and that relates to the financing work later, which I will show you in a minute. So what kind of regulatory changes would be needed in order to enable these business models to survive? Right. That sounds still very abstract. How does that look in a specific case? So here is life. My building is green. That's a Spanish example. One of the 54 examples and case studies that we looked at in order to distill these business models. And here you already see that the environmental conditions give you already a hint of what nature-based solutions can do and how businesses can be engaged. Right. So, for example, this case it revolves around cooling schools in Spain, and here we broke it down into several different indicators for different stakeholders that all participate in these schools. So you have the school itself, the public bodies, and also the families. And here you see what kind of value this business needs to generate in order to be viable in the eyes of different stakeholders. And that can be indicators for the school in terms of the energy bill or the roof maintenance, so putting up green roofs. This is the case here. But there also can be benefits for the students. So then again, the question is, who is going to finance these viable business models? And that's something that we looked at in let's see, in the next sub project that we did in Naturvation. So once you have these business models and you have private sector actors involved alongside public actors, the question is how do you develop financing arrangements for different nature-based solutions? And there we developed 7 so-called pathways that addressed a couple of the challenges that we came across. So you had the benefits that are distributed, so that was already set, but you also had mismatches between, okay, how do these NBS projects actually look like, and what kind of financing do current market players can actually supply? So are the ticket sizes too big? Is the risk return criteria, are they matching what is out there in the market? And how can, for example, also public money be used to crowd in private finance? So there were a couple of pathways that we developed, and for more the institutional investors, it revolves around kind of developing indicators so, that they can use quantitative methodologies to assess the viability of these different NBS projects. Another part, and that is shown on the top, on the bottom of the screen, is to develop these co-governance mechanisms so that you actually add the benefits of different stakeholders in order to cover the costs. And that means also, okay, you basically have the sources from which the funding needs to cover. But until then, there's no basically financing vehicle, a legal vehicle, organizational vehicle that will include all these different sources of finance. So this is a kind of a glimpse of what we did, and I'm very happy to discuss further now with questions from the chat.
So thank you very much, Friedemann. So Maria, do we have some questions already?
We do. We have some questions, and I'm not sure. Well, I'm a bit of doubting what should I follow up on the because there is a question referring to Friedemann, Friedemann's part. So maybe I'll just take this first. Have a question from Paula. Have you made any business model for healthcare facilities, hospitals in Europe? So that is a question. Could you take that?
Yep, I can take that. Thanks, Paula, for your question. This is a very specific type of organization. Usually, we develop kind of 8 archetypes of business models for nature-based solutions, and they are available. I think if you looked at the presentation, there was a naturvation.eu/business model. So there you have all the 8 archetypes, and there's 1 or 2 of them that also look at the benefits in terms of healthcare. Which is especially relevant, I think, if you look at hospitals. So there, it's about the patients, but also the staff and how they could benefit from nature-based solution. So I think there are studies out there that found if you from your window in the hospital, if you look outside and you see green, that also the time that you actually need to stay in the hospital is reduced. So you definitely have these benefits. So that would mean, okay, how can we incorporate that then for this sometimes it's private or public sector organizations that run these hospitals. For public funding, I think this is clearer. But I think also, for example, taking the reduced time that you have when you are surrounded by green also saves hospital beds, which private kind of foundations that run a part of the hospitals are very keen on having this information to basically calculate their return on investment on these trees outside of the hospitals.
Yeah, thanks. Indeed, there's a lot of work done by our colleagues on business models, and not only that you, just to add to your answer perhaps, not that you only can concentrate on a particular business model, but it's also can be interesting and profitable to stack those models together. So more later on that. And I will go to the next question that we have received through the chat concerning the introductory presentation where we showed the numbers about the return on social return on investment. And the question is regarding this 42% that received a high social return, and what about the rest? It's 58% of the other cases. So I'll take this question if you wish, if that's okay with you. So what we did, we took the data, or we took the cases from the atlas, from the Urban Nature Atlas that was developed by our colleagues. We can post the link to the atlas, or perhaps you already found it, just Naturvation Project Atlas, where we looked at the different projects, and we just assumed that they will, in any case, bring the social return, that is the return to the value. Those projects will create value to the citizens. So this is the public or social value that is attached, and that's what we can derive from our from the values that we have obtained for different types of nature in different conditions in Europe. So this doesn't mean at the same time that these values create cash flows. It can in some cases, as just Friedemann just illustrated, but it doesn't necessarily create cash flow. So what we have, the numbers that we have provided, indicates the value to the public, to the citizens. So if there is a park or any type of greenery, creates public value. So that's what we are talking about, and that's why we made different calculations we calculated the present value, because the stream of those benefits that the urban nature provides is continuous. So we calculated the present value, discounting those values, but also the costs. And what we found was that the urban, let me see, just to check up whether my numbers are correct, that the parks and no, well, sorry, urban blue areas and urban forests are which quite surely provide you with a positive social value, while other types of green, like green connected to gray, which are really smaller pieces of green in cities or parks, it really depends on the height of the investment and maintenance costs. So we're getting maybe into a bit of technical story right now, but what am I telling is that it depends on the cases, but a lot of nature does generate public value, and different types of nature or different types can create different value in value terms. But let's see whether we can have we can dive more into that. Wouter or Friedemann, do you want to add to that, or we can take another question?
Oh, thank you very much, Maria. So I think you rightly point out that we show there's a large economic value out there of these different nature-based solutions. And an important question, I think, for practice is also, well, how can we actually make sure that the money flows in then into these type of interventions? And there's a question from the audience, I think, that relates very well to this. So Friedemann, perhaps you can answer this one. So the question is, well, how much interest in nature-based solutions are you seeing from institutional investors so far? So any industry leaders to point to, and how can these investments be increased?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you very much. That was Francis, I think. Yeah, Francis. Yeah, so we see some interest in this institutional investor. So for those who are not familiar with the finance sphere, so what does institutional investor actually mean? So here we talk about pension funds and insurance or reinsurance companies. So these are kind of companies that manage large sums of money. So they also usually have a relatively big ticket size, so from that they need to have in order to invest or to be interested in an investment. We do see some interest, particularly in Sweden and the Netherlands. I can give a very specific example. So there we had, that was actually developed during the Naturvation project. We had a collaboration between an association that is responsible for like scaling up green roofs here in the Netherlands and one of the insurance firms. And they developed a product together because they, as an insurance firm, and that's why they're interested, particularly interested in nature-based solutions, they have both sides. So on the one hand, they are engaged in adaptation activities because that's what directly impacts their portfolio and the kind of damages, the compensation they have to pay out in case there are any damages. On the other hand, they're also engaged in mitigation to reduce that risks. So they have both sides, and that's where they're most inclined. And we call them kind of the missing link between the institutional investor sphere and nature-based solution, because for them it is more clear also in terms of adaptation what the benefits will be. So we developed this scheme together with the Green Roofs Association in Netherlands and Interpolis. So these are one that I could mention as kind of industry leaders. And generally, you have the institutional investors in Sweden that are quite interested and are the front runners, we would say, in Europe at this, also in terms of quantifying and benchmarking the types of benefits that accrue or that result from investing in nature-based solution. So the route is usually via real estate investments, and that you kind of tag the benefits of NBS to the building investments because they already have a certain type of scale that is interesting for institutional investors. And they also know how to manage these buildings. So from then, it's only a small step towards integrating nature-based solution. Whereas, this, for example, other types of NBS like community gardens or these smaller types, they will never be interesting for these types of institutional investors.
Well, thank you very much, Friedemann. I also saw in the chat that people are asking for links to our publications on this topic. That's something we can include in the chat after this session. So we're very happy to make that available. So something that came up in previous sessions is also that nature-based solutions, well, although they are generally create positive value, they may also have some side effects that are maybe in the social sphere not always that desirable, like green gentrification, for example. So Maria, I think you did a lot of research on that. Can you elaborate on these type of side effects and how they can be assessed?
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed, this is an important issue, an important question that is being asked and increasingly being asked as more and more urban green is being developed, and it has also been developed in the past. So we have a record to see and to check whether this also creates any negative effects, and indeed it does. As you rightly point out, the gentrification can play a very important role in that, and it can range between quite serious cases when local or the people who live in the area can really pushed out of the area because in particular the housing prices are rising a lot. So as the area becomes more green and more comfortable and more nice to live in, so other people are coming into the area and sort of can buy and pay the higher price for the housing to be able to enjoy this area. So we looked into that as well within this project, and we found out, we looked in particular at we did look at housing prices, and we looked at the connection between the location of urban nature and the housing prices at different distances from this nature. So what we could see is that indeed housing prices do reflect this sort of green premium due to the presence of nature, and this is in addition to all other kind of categories that can influence the property price. It is quite a stable percentage of house price across the world, essentially, both in America and Asia and in Europe, where we have the most data from. And it can range between 5 to 20% of the housing price. So the average would be 5%, and it also can it depends on the local circumstances. So this is absolutely an important indicator for policymakers to look at and to consider this effect when urban green is being developed. So I can also continue more, but maybe we can take something else. Or is there anything that you think is important to mention at this moment?
No, thanks a lot, Maria, for the good answer, I think, to that question. So a big takeaway I had from that research also is how context dependent these type of problems are, right? So for example, if you're a city planner and in your neighborhood you're already concerned about gentrification in terms of low income households not able to afford housing anymore in your neighborhood, then I think it's important to keep in mind also that if you create more nature in such an area, that could worsen the problem. On the other hand, also building nature can also then be seen as a positive effect in neighborhoods that needs to be revitalized. So if you are renovating large neighborhoods because currently they're not perceived as being very attractive, then this may also be a positive aspect and give a boost to the housing market. So I think, but it's an issue. It really depends on the local situation.
Absolutely. And we have in our article that's just recently been published, we have also provided an example of how it can be mapped, those effects, how these can be mapped in a city level. So that another important point is perhaps that presence of multiple urban nature can sort of aggravate this effect, and those effects are also overlapping. So if a property is found near a number of urban nature sites, the gentrification effects can even be worse or more severe. So this is something that is important to look at, and urban planners can also map those effects essentially. So
yeah. I think the tool you created is very useful for that. So there's another question also about financing. So Friedemann, I will ask this question to you. That in an earlier session there was a question about the role of philanthropists in helping to fund nature-based solutions. And the question is whether you have seen any evidence of this in your research.
Yeah, thanks, Helen, for this question. I wouldn't call them philanthropists. Usually what you see is this is kind of also how the community evolves. So these days they call themselves impact investors, and there's a there's a distinction there, because they would like to see like not only the monetary return. I mean, but partly also monetary return, but also like the social return on investment or a nature related return on investment. So that is something that we would see, and we also, one of the pathways that we've developed is through engaging these communities, and you see them also in the G20 green finance community, for example. These kind of associations are becoming more prominent. They're still not completely focused on, or they still haven't picked up on nature-based solutions per se a lot. So this is definitely one route that we could pursue in order to engage the impact-oriented investors, and have also the ones that already have a certain type of mission then relate to nature-based solutions. On the other hand, you see a couple of foundations already that are active for quite some time. I don't know if I would call them philanthropists. So they got an endowment at some point in time, and they have a certain mission. So they are engaged in local development. So that's what you see. There's usually very local. You had an entrepreneur or someone that had an endowment, and then they would engage. It's also not necessarily related to NBS. So I think these are two. One is the local way engaging with these, and the other one would be via associations. And then again, the question is, okay, how do we make this impact that we have with NBS on social and environmental effects? How do we make that transparent?
Yeah, and I think there's also a follow-up question whether you could say a little bit more about the engagement really of the investors in development of NBS. So in how far are these investors kind of have a more comprehensive perspective? So for example, in terms of serving society, or in how far is it just financial returns maybe that they're a bit more narrowly focused on? Can you share your perspective on that?
Yeah. I mean, there's two different types of actors. You have the mission-driven types, like Triodos Bank, for example, in the Netherlands. You have also pension funds and other institutional investors. They have this type of mission, but the bigger they get, the more formalized it is. Usually, that's what you see. I mean, also Triodos, for example, they can only handle so many cases where they really engage with the entrepreneurs, where they engage with the case, etc., which is a more holistic perspective and approach. So this is less scalable. So my feeling from the research and also from other research I'm doing in for example, in the energy sector related to the energy transition is, if you want to get the big investors engaged, then you have to unfortunately you have to formalize the benefits. You have to put them into a taxonomy that they can benchmark themselves. They can compare themselves. It's a very competitive industry, whether you like it or not. I mean, this is a different discussion. But this is something how you can engage them. We have anecdotal evidence, as I mentioned earlier, with the Green Roofs Coalition, and then an insurance company, a reinsurance company, that they actively engage with the cases, with the entrepreneurs, with the people, and develop a product. So that would be, I think, the deepest type of engagement that we have seen so far. But usually it's the bigger ones you engage if you make sure, make transparent, and in terms of indicators, how that will have an impact.
Yeah, so I also see that we are almost at 1 o'clock. So unfortunately, the session is almost over. I see there were some questions left also about hedonic pricing methods and valuing nature. So what's maybe good for the audience to know is that Maria and I will also be available in the Hives to further chat with some interested people. And we will also post the links to the papers that were requested in this chat. So for now, I'd like to thank you all very much for your participation in this session.